Ai calculatorul ăsta, mă, mai de aici.
Da, mă, dacă vin aici, nu pot să rețin întrebările dacă... For our participants here, our course participants, please, if you like to ask questions, use the two WhatsApp groups from your own course. I will have the WhatsApp open and I'll address the questions on your behalf, okay? So whenever you have a question from one of our keynote speakers, please use your typical WhatsApp group for the course, either the information resource management or the defense resource management group. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 16th edition of our International Conference on Defense Resource Management. We are very happy to have you here and to also have a lot of online participants joining us today. And I would like to welcome to the floor for his opening remarks, the DRESMARA's director, Colonel Professor Florin Eduard Grosaru. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vlad. Good morning, distinguished guests and dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege as director of DRESMARA to warmly welcome you all and to address a special salute to all our keynote speakers. From the very beginning, I want to underline the fact that we co-organize this international conference alongside with our colleagues and friends, the following institutions: the Faculty of National Security from War Studies University, Poland. The Dean of this faculty is here. Thank you for being here. The Faculty of Military Leadership from University of Defense, Czech Republic. Alexander Cel Bun Military Academy from Republic of Moldova, and Military Science Section of Academy of Romanian Scientists. In organizing this conference, we had the support of our partners as follows: the NGO Political Research Group, which the president is here, Liliana Filip, welcome. Nicolae Bălcescu Land Force Academy from Sibiu, Transylvania University from Brașov, and HUMIT NATO Center of Excellency from Oradea, and our media partners, DC News, Radio, România Actualități, and Interview. Last but not the least, allow me to extend a special thanks to all of our sponsors, the ones that put the needed resources in the proper basket. More than ever, today, Drezmaras needs to focus its educational efforts on relevance. Our research interests and our expertise indicate quite clear the importance of joining efforts in achieving tangible results and, in the long term, in the long run, the exclusive outcome of a security and stable environment for us and for future generations. Hence, we have reached the conclusion that we should center this year's conference alternative on an enticing theme like defense of the future, innovation, technology, and resilience. Considering that, I want to highlight what stands out as clear evidence. We cannot speak about technology and innovation without education. After a few short ideas on this topic, I will continue by outlining the need to create a defense innovation management system in order to maintain our competitive advantage. Why education? Because education is the key pillar for both technology and innovation. To whom is education dedicated? Undoubtedly, to human resources, which are the main resources in any organization, even more so in the military organization. In this respect, we can talk about human power, one word written in capital letters. The explosive evolution of technologies raises a big question mark regarding the assurance of the defense system's resilience. Thus, the biggest challenge for the educational system is that the results of education are not available right away, and they cannot be in tandem with the pace of technology development. There is a delay. Thus, education follows technology jump in the best case scenarios. So, what is the best to be done? It is obvious that education takes time, sometimes too much time, and, of course, a lot of resources, human, informational, financial, and logistics. Those are needed in the same proportions for both educational process part, professors and students. As a result, the beneficiaries have only two alternatives: waiting and/or investing. Waiting to finish the educational process, and after that to use the human resources in a proper manner, and/or investing continuously and constantly in education, in its permanent upgrading and development. In this respect, the correspondence between demands and offers must be fair and clear. Fair as a result of a right overview and right assessment of threats and risks for our national security, all in line with technology development, and clear as a result of consensus on the political demands in the national security field. In my opinion, the last one is more desirable than the first one. As we all know, the educational process is a big time consumer because on the one hand, as I said, educational outcomes cannot be achieved over the night. And on the other hand, for a number of reasons like human resistance to change, lessons learned needed, lack of specific experiences, new technology, new ways of actions, the need to define new concepts, new principles, and the list could continue. In short, give the proper time for a proper soldier. In this respect, we are in front of a difficult mission to adapt and maintain military education in a strong relationship with the reality from the field, even in the context of the race for disruptive defense technologies. We realize that this objective is hard to follow, especially when we must take into account the interoperability and working with our allies under the same standards in the presence of different background and different educational systems. As a result, it is a must to be involved in common projects in order to understand what and how to do together to accomplish our common security goals. Coming back to the present hot issues and to the future framework of defense, which is related with emerging technologies, the capacity to innovate, and the ways you make your system resilient. I could say that we all should build defense with wisdom and efficiency. To become a creator of disruptive, innovative technologies implies major changes in relation with ways of working and organizational aspects, the governance of networks, individual and collective mindsets, and the rationales of business models. It requires increased agility, an attitude prone to breaking institutional and organizational boundaries, and the introduction of multidisciplinary teams where people with different backgrounds and experiences work and create together. The Open Innovation Framework has promoted a new user-centric approach of innovation and creativity. Users located at the heart of the definition and resolution of problem. And sometimes they actively contribute to find and develop new solutions. The user-centric model deeply changes individual and collective ways of working for the development of new products and services. Defense policymakers need to adapt and reshape the governance of innovation. Open innovation requires to invent a brand new model for state, science, industry interactions in place to develop military capabilities. This transformation is mandatory to stay in the game of the dynamics of innovations and focal actor. For defense policymakers, the stakes are high for two reasons. Firstly, open innovation and the traditional model of defense innovation are to some extent in contradiction with each other. Defense policymakers have a constant focus on the control of technologies, the protection of the supply chain, and the preservation and or management of capabilities in the defense industrial base. Ministries of Defense act at the same time as clients and regulators. First, firms acting as system integrators represent the key actors for the development of complex military programs. They develop techno-push processes, implying a verticalization of the value chain. From this perspective, military services are not absent from the development of complex systems, and they represent the final users. But they have a governance role in the development of technologies. It is not expected to them to be present all through the steps of the process. The starting point of the reasoning about complex military programs always related to the trade-off between technological superiority and the cost of developing new technologies. Countries such as USA also foster technological superiority as a strategic objective, even if this process incurs very high development and production costs, as illustrated with the F-22 and Joint Strike fighter programs. It is now important to introduce more flexibility by combining various models of innovation, and most notably combine the techno-push approach and the user-centric model. This will support the emergence of ideas and technologies and will give room to various development trajectories. Secondly, open innovation draws a new and complex relationship between civilian and military technological innovations. It is important to introduce new ways to manage dual-use technologies. Innovate technologies relevant for the development of military capabilities can emerge from any sector. The management of innovation for defense, therefore, requires new reference patterns with new ways of working and collaborating with a wide variety of actors. The open innovation perspective requires a transformation in the management of defense innovation at two levels: inside public administration in charge of military services, and at the level of innovation networks. All countries have initiated transformations to adapt their innovation policies to open innovation contexts. Step by step, they introduce new tools and structures that all share several characteristics, such as putting military users at the center of the innovation processes, encouraging bottom-up initiatives, and working with innovative startups. The transformation speed depends on national cultures. This is the envelope of what I envisioned for these 2 days. I am confident that we will have great ideas on the table, and so our efforts will contribute to the future of defense. Dear guests, now we can say that the ice has been broken, and it is time to develop more and more the concepts, theses, and procedures in the field of management of innovations and resilience of the defense resources management. Let's build together the performance in our work. Let me now close by wishing you delightful and stimulating debates. I hereby declare open the Defense Resources Management Studies International Conference. Thank you all. Vlad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the opening speech. And we can now begin our first plenary session, which will be on the topic of new security threats, resilience, and leadership in an era of multiple and overlapping crises. We have our panelists for this session here. Antonia Colibășanu has also joined us online. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our first keynote speaker of today, Mr. Joshua Bergin. He will deliver his speech on leadership in uncertain times. Mr. Bergin holds a master's in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He serves as the coordinator of the New Security Leaders Program at the Warsaw Security Forum and is an advisor to the European Academy of Diplomacy. For nearly 3 decades, Mr. Bergin has balanced professional interests in domestic US politics, international affairs, focusing on Central and Eastern Europe. Thank you, sir, for joining us here today. You have the floor.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's an incredible honor to be here at the Defense Resource Management Conference in Brussels. I'm going to take the mask off. As a matter of housekeeping, I have a couple things to cover. First, I'm here as a private citizen. Speaking in that capacity, my words are my own and do not reflect either the European Academy of Diplomacy or any government position. These are my ideas and my ideas alone. Second, normally when I give a speech like this, I use an index card, a reference note, because I know that I speak fast. I've prepared a text, but I want you to help me. If I'm speaking too fast, please show me this sign so I can know to slow down. When I first expressed interest in attending this forum, I expected to take part in a panel discussion or perhaps a sidebar conversation. So to be given this honor to speak so early in the agenda is an honor indeed. And I have to acknowledge with some gratitude the Colonel Florin Edward Gristario, for his intense leadership here through this organization, his commitment to integrating NATO and Romania and partner countries to the questions of security, and his commitment to future generations speaks well for your leadership. I also want to thank Vlad Dumitrache for his leadership in coordinating this forum itself. And last but not least, I cannot forget my dear friend, Liliana Philippe, whom I met through the Warsaw Security Forum in Warsaw through the new Secure Leaders Program. We've developed a friendship, and without her recommendation, I certainly wouldn't be here today. As I look across this room and I see the many faces, masks notwithstanding, I'm reminded of the words of former Polish ambassador Jan Pijarski, who gave a definition of diplomacy that I think may be relevant for us here today. Now, I know that our focus is not diplomacy. Nevertheless, the ambassador defined diplomacy as a careful balance of 3 things: protocol, cholesterol, and alcohol. May we find success in balancing these 3 over the next few days. My topic today is on leadership. And while we could speak about leadership for hours, leadership principles, frameworks, skills, and tools, we have but a few minutes today. You need to know a little of my background. I grew up poor, the oldest of 7 children. In my household, I didn't see much in the way of public leadership. Oh, to give my parents credit, they created a safe space for their family, but the limits of their leadership really ended at the door. I wouldn't see true public leadership until I worked on my first campaign as a teenager. And in that moment, I realized the degree to which public leadership can change outcomes. In other words, change the future. While I would later study leadership at Harvard, these formative years in the trenches gave me a solid grounding in practical experience that would then be benefit by those frameworks of leadership studied at Harvard. Frameworks such as persuasion. Yes, there's a course for this, and I still have a 3.5-inch manual from the course describing how persuasion can be used to move audiences. Public narrative leadership. How does speech matter? Behavioral economy, and so much more. Leadership is more important today than at any other time over the last 2 generations, in my opinion. For we live in an age of deep uncertainty. Yes, uncertainty prevails today. The things we knew to be stable and reliable have shifted like sands beneath our feet. For the past 40 years or so, we've lived in an unparalleled time of human peace and global prosperity. The early and mid 20th century was marked by incredible devastation. First, World War I, which was the most destructive event known to humanity at that time, quickly followed by World War II. Communism and its prophets, Joseph Stalin and Chairman Mao, inflicted mayhem and death, mostly on their own people in Europe and in Asia. But they also propped up tyrannical leaders around the world that were acting as client states. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union and its failed ideology of communism and centralized control, combined with its aging leadership, basically were a spent force. The end of the Soviet Union marked a massive transition for millions of people across Europe. The fact is, I don't need to tell you this, because for most of you, or at least by proxy, this was lived experience. You have deep connection to this reality. You touched it, you tasted it, you smelled it. It was up close and personal, and if not for you, then probably your parents. Yet 2 generations have passed since 1980, and the world has dramatically changed. Things that we once could only imagine in science fiction. Remember watching Star Trek back as a child and Wesley Crusher with his little tablet, or Dr. Spock, and we thought, that stuff's fantastic, incredible. It's now so commonplace, we've become bored. We want more. But connected with these little devices, for the first time in human history, we can literally speak to anyone, anywhere in the world with almost no cost and instantaneously. Would you have imagined when you were a child that this would be the reality of our life today? While the stuff of fantasy has become reality, political institutions, especially in the West, have become more shaky, less trusted, both at home and abroad. The aging paper of our multilateral agreements, drafted by those who were forged by the fires of war, are now too often tended by soft, colorless bureaucrats. And those who sound warnings in places like Romania or Poland are often ignored by the elites in capitals like Washington, D.C. and Brussels. As military leaders with the sacred charge to keep your country and your peoples safe, I know you've studied history, and I don't have to tell you that at times like these, where uncertainty abounds, geopolitical risk increases. We are all well aware of the escalating tensions in Asia, tensions that have no obvious release valve, given the fact that the most powerful regional political figure will most likely hold power until his natural death. And we can't ignore the president for life here in the European neighborhood as well. A president whose regime would almost certainly take advantage of any conflict in Asia by encroaching on one or more of his border state neighbors here in Europe. I wrote that part before I found the following quote. In fact, it was in an article published just in the last couple of days. Dr. Andrew Mikta at the Marshall Center wrote the following. Should the US-China confrontation devolve into a shooting war, it will draw America's military assets there, creating an irresistible opportunity for Vladimir Putin to compete for advantage in the European theater. He goes on to say that we've entered an era that will define NATO's future. The alliance will either restore itself as a fighting force or will devolve into nothing more than a talking shop. So what is to be done? That's why you're here, to debate and consider both old and new risks, as well as to mitigate for those risks. Allow me to offer 3 broad suggestions. A suggestion for the more senior figures in the room, a general suggestion, and a suggestion for the younger leaders in the room as well. And I begin with the notion of utilizing the expertise of young leaders. In hierarchical organizations, such as militaries, there are often structural and cultural barriers that make it impossible to listen to younger members of society, and even younger members within the institution. This is universal. I've seen it literally in every country I've ever been in. This is true in Florida. This is true in Washington, D.C., in Massachusetts, where I lived, in Germany, where I'm living now, in Kazakhstan, where I found my wife. In every single environment, I saw these sorts of strictures. I also saw it in my church environment growing up when I served on the deacon board. I've witnessed the same hierarchical groupthink in my political life. In these environments, rigid protocols tend to govern those who are allowed to speak, to whom, and on what terms. The challenge we face today in areas of technology are best understood by young people. And by young people, I don't mean 40-somethings, but often 20-somethings. Allow me to share an example of what I mean when we're talking about sort of going beyond or getting outside of these strictures. Many years ago, while I was living and working in Kazakhstan, Ambassador Richard Holbrooke's staff, when he was at the Asia Society, contacted my office with an unusual request. On behalf of the ambassador, his staff asked that a colleague of mine and I meet the ambassador at 5:30 in the morning at a conference room in his hotel for an upcoming visit to Central Asia. Did any of you happen to meet Ambassador Holbrooke while he was still living? If you didn't, I must describe him for you. This was a giant sort of figure. He stood 6.5 feet tall. His hands just dwarfed mine. He was a larger than life guy. He was also a senior figure in US foreign policy. Had Hillary Clinton won the presidency in 2008, he would most likely have been her Secretary of State. My colleague and I had never met him. We had no connection to him prior, and we were so far down in the hierarchy that we shouldn't even have been on his radar. Nevertheless, my colleague and I were at the hotel, bright and early, suit and tie, 5:30 in the morning, and he came bounding into the room, exuding energy and confidence, apologizing about the early hour. He made clear to us that he valued our insights, that he understood that based on our role, we probably knew far more about the political situation in Kazakhstan than anyone in the embassy. But for reasons of protocol, he could not meet with us during regular business hours. Holbrooke understood that often the people with the least formal power have insights beyond those of anyone in the bubble, simply because they're in that bubble and they can't see or understand. Now, some of you will ignore this advice, but a few of you will take this to heart and will find ways to engage your bright young minds. And I know that Romania has some of the smartest young leaders in Europe. I must include Poland as well, because I've interacted with a good number of the sharpest young minds in Poland as well at this time. For those of you who are willing and able to engage the minds and insights of your young leaders, perhaps through unorthodox means, you will find benefits for Romania, for Poland, and for your country that will bring benefit for your future children and grandchildren. In fact, their futures may depend on it. Number two, and frankly, if I'm honest, this is the one that's probably the most important for me. Build stronger political ties with the US and Europe. Now, some of you are thinking straight away, but we already have strong ties with the US and Europe. How can we make those stronger? I'll start in this way. The United States has the most open political system in the world. Can you tell me with some reasonable confidence who will be elected to the United States Congress in the next 5 to 10 years? It's possible. Not so much by name, but by class. For you see, the profile of future members of Congress is fairly predictable. Nearly all have previously served on local city councils, county commissions, school boards, or in state legislatures. In these local policymaking roles, they tend to be under 40. They tend to raise more money than their peers. They often have a family member who preceded them in politics. In my home state of Florida, Congressman Vern Buchanan, who serves the residents of Sarasota, has a son in the Florida House of Representatives. His name is James. He's been an elected member of the Florida House since 2018. He will face term limits in 2026, meaning he will not be able to run for that seat any longer. Sometime between now and then, his father will decide not to run for Congress. And as a result, he will pour all of his energy in getting his young son elected. Virtually all the data points needed to identify future members of Congress currently serving in lower office is publicly available. Age, party affiliation, fundraising ability, term limits. There's more data points, but to be clear, virtually all of it's a matter of public record. Oh, it might not be aggregated, but it's there. And I'm not describing a theory, but something that's practical. The reason I know it's practical is because another small country has been effectively identifying and building relationships with current and future US officials for decades. This country maintains a very high level of military to military engagement, but that military to military engagement is also supported by a parallel structure of political engagement. What country am I talking about? Does anybody know? Israel, that's correct. The country is Israel. Israel uses a range of organizations to build and maintain connections with current and future US political policymakers. These include the American Israeli Political Action Committee, or AIPAC, the American Jewish Committee, and the Jewish Community Relations Council. Nearly every single newly elected young politician gets approached by one or more of these organizations, and often that approach includes an invitation to visit Israel. This includes my good friend Heather Hamilton, who was elected to the Select Board in Brookline, Massachusetts. This includes my sister Rachel Bergen, who was elected to the Florida House a number of years ago, and I can name for you countless others that face the same. Israel has decades of experience with this relationship development, but they had to start somewhere. And I would suggest that for small countries or smaller countries, important in their regional neighborhoods, but perhaps those who have relationship development with the US and Europe that's critical to long-term success, it's important to continuously develop new relationships, not just with the military sector, but also with the political sector as well. We can go into this later, but you all probably remember the pre-2008 presidential election when George W. Bush had built the foundational agreements for a US, Poland, and Romanian defense structure that the new administration came and basically abrogated shortly thereafter. The reason for strength in Congress, or the purpose for having strength of relationship in Congress, is to be able to protect or push back on those sorts of administration pullbacks. The reason it's critical to focus on junior elected officials, those who are not yet elected to federal office, is due to a couple of factors. First, state and local government's posts don't pay very well. They often have a term limit of 6, 8, or 12 years. In contrast, the US Congress pays $178,000 per year and has no term limit. Thus, a state house or a state senate member, or any other local official, who would be approached about a foreign education trip is much more receptive. Also, it's worth noting that once someone is elected to Congress, they've effectively punched the golden ticket. They rarely lose in a competitive election. They rarely have to go outside of Washington. And even when they do on a congressional delegation, much of that agenda is defined by the State Department. So before they're elected to Congress is the place where you can have the biggest point of impact. The point to simply bring American politicians is not simply to bring American politicians to Romania or Poland, but to maintain those relationships with them for decades to come. Romania has at least some infrastructure needed to push forward with an initiative like this. The Romanian American Chamber of Commerce is one, and certainly Poland has a deep diaspora in Chicago and in other parts of the country, which could push forward these ideas. The third point I'd like to raise for you is more focused at the junior members, both here in the room and watching online. And that point is to go the extra mile. This point, for those of you who do happen to be in that younger category, do you want more responsibility? Do you want to be promoted? Do you want greater opportunities? Then my greatest, strongest advice to you is to go the extra mile. And to illustrate, I have 3 examples I'll share with you. Many years ago now, I was mentoring a young woman in Kazakhstan. She had grown up poor. She was the only child of a single mother. She was not from the power clan or the presidential family, but she'd gotten a good education and had a good job with an oil and energy company. But then her company was sold to the Chinese, and she soon had a falling out with her new boss. It was not long before she had gotten a new job with an American registered AIM-listed mining company as an office manager. Now, this was a small company, and so she had a range of responsibilities. At some point, there was a planned investor tour with investors coming to Kazakhstan from all over the world. She had managed many of the logistics and knew that the potential investors would be arriving at 3 a.m. in the morning. Don't ask me why, but all the flights arriving internationally to Almaty come in at 3 a.m. As she described the planned investor tour to me, I asked her, "Are you planning to go to the airport to meet them?" At this question, she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, "Why would I do that? I've arranged the hotel transfers. They're arriving at 3. I need my sleep. It's not my job to meet them. I'm not doing that." We sat for a minute and I said, but these investors are important for the future of the company. They're able to bring much needed capital. And they're not used to the norms of Kazakhstan or the particulars of the airport. One bad experience could sour them on the whole thing. You could very well be the difference between success or failure of the entire effort. She was not happy about this, but she took my advice to heart and she showed up. And indeed, there was a problem which she was quickly able to solve. She welcomed the group, made them feel at home, and got them safely to their destination. More importantly, she internalized the importance of going the extra mile and was soon promoted HR director. And in less than 3 years went from being the lowly office manager to the president of the Kazakh subsidiary, and was responsible for the company's 3 locations, hundreds of employees, government relations, permitting, logistics, and much more. She was under 30, navigating in an incredibly patriarchal society. Go the extra mile. The second illustration is similar to the first. In the 1960s, a young man joined a publishing firm in New York City. He soon began to stay late at the office because he realized the company president worked until 10 each night. He paid attention to the fact that the president and the board chairman would leave the office for dinner each night at about 7:30 and would return between 8:30 and 8:45. So he began to strategically make himself visible so the boss would know that he too was staying late each day. One night, about a month after he began doing this, the boss asked for his help with some copies. When the young man returned the copies to the boss, he asked if there was anything else he could do to help. So long after all the other junior employees had gone home, this young man was assisting the company president. After a few months of this routine, the company president made him his executive assistant, where he would learn and grow and later become a titan of the publishing industry himself. Go the extra mile. And one final example, a young man I met a few years ago was attending university where a local political figure taught courses. This young man would sit and wait near the elevators in order to speak with this local politician. For 2 years, he did this, waiting outside of the elevator. Multiple times, he was given a business card and told to call the office. Other times, staff would push him out of the way or block his access. But he was persistent, multiple times each week for 2 years. At some point, this political figure faced a reversal of fortune. So many of his staff left. And this young man's opportunity had arrived. He had his moment. Today, he's the senior advisor for a large city mayor and has managed multiple campaigns, including a national one. Go the extra mile. These suggestions can be summarized as follows. Engage other people where they are and meet needs. Each of these requires us to step out of our comfort zone and to do more than most. The current global uncertainties we face will not be remediated by rigidly adhering to past protocols and norms. Am I advocating for us to abandon all of our norms and traditions? Of course not, but rather to advance the notion that our young leaders need to know that they have a place and are being heard in areas of expertise. Our senior leaders need the energy and support of our young people, less worried about their title and job description than getting the job done. And our nation state allies need stronger ties between our elected policymakers. As I'm closing my remarks, I hope that over the next few days, each of you are able to successfully balance all of those 3 points we discussed earlier, the protocol, the cholesterol, and the alcohol, and that together we can find effective solutions to the challenging times in which we live. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with each of you. I look forward to meeting many of you later today during the sessions, at the gala dinner, or perhaps over a cold Romanian beer. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Josh, for this first keynote speech for today. Truly a very interesting discussion that was raised. I'll take the mask off to be heard better. Yeah, because there were some key points discussed, the uncertainties and the uncertain times that we live in. And this idea that you shared with us about public leaders and their role in mitigating all these uncertainties. The example of Israel, obviously, one of the elements that I remember from her speech, the fact that it's a good direction for us to try and somehow connect with these young leaders that the US develops in a predictable fashion that we perhaps don't have such so predictable in our young leaders. We have some questions. I have one as well, but I'll start with the question from one of our participants, from Colonel Usman Ali. Yeah, he also talks about these new emerging threats and sustained crises that are due to failure of leadership, diplomacy, political engagement, or a bureaucratic hurdle, or a mix of all of this. What is your opinion? Which of these factors weigh in more in these emerging threats that you have also talked about in your speech?
Well, certainly there's some combination of both. I mean, the notion of bureaucratic strictures is clear. I mean, I think we've all faced some moment in which we want to beat our head against a wall because of some rigid tradition or norm that prevents us from achieving something important. That said, relationships matter. And I spent time on relationships because in my view, it's relationships that end up solving most of those strictures. Again, you've faced something in your military career, a barrier, and you're beating your head against the wall. And then at the right moment, some contact, some friend, some relationship you have is what ultimately solves it. To me, relationships are the most important thing to foster and develop and to strategically develop them. So for instance, there's a reason I didn't advocate today a growing effort to bring academics together between the Romania and other parts of the world. I focused on policy leaders. Why? Because policy leaders at the end of the day make decisions about budget. They make decisions about direction and policy. And even though they may have to work in coordination with an executive branch or other branches of government, they have an influence in a way that no academic ever will.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. And another question that I had, and due to the fact that we are together with US, Romania, and Poland here, given the example of Israel that you talked about, do you consider the Free Sea initiative that Poland and Romania have engaged in together with the US as such an example of collaboration with US and a good example of how we could further develop our leaders and our connection between leaders from all three partner states?
So let me ask you this question. There's 435 members of the United States Congress. There's 100 senators, so 535 setting broad policy, and then the administration. How many members of Congress do you think would know what you mean when you say the 3 Cs initiative?
A small percentage, probably. From what? Or...
So there are some key personnel within the government, at the State Department, at DOD, in other sections of the government. But at the end of the day, they don't set spending priorities.
Yeah, so basically we have broken the ice, but haven't taken a further step from that.
Again, you have to work with the government. So I'm not saying abandon your military to military engagements, not at all. Maintain your high-level engagements already. If these governments, Romanian, Poland, are spending money on lobbyists to work with the administration, don't back away from that. I'm saying expand the person-to-person relationships, because as I touched on in the speech, I believe that the bilateral agreements, the multilateral agreements that were put in place after the Second World War were put together by mostly men, but some women who've been forged by the fires of conflict. For them, the world of chaos was visceral and real, and they didn't want that anymore. So they created these formulas for cooperation. Well, those men are now dead. They're not there. Those memories are gone, and they're being tended by people that are on a 3-year rotation to hold a seat and to move on, not deeply vested in these things, sort of in some ways at times given up. So engaging with those people that are at the policy level. I cited earlier the notion of the defense regime, the missile regime that was to utilize Poland and Romania and the United States. It was arranged basically in 2007, 2008, and then the 2009 administration backed away from that. If there had been a sufficient coalition in Congress, I guarantee you it would have been much harder for that administration to pull back, because even 45 members, just 10% of the Congress saying, no, that's not going to happen, would probably have prevented that pullback.
Great, thank you for the answer. And I have another, let's say, complementary question on what you said, because you mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, at least this is how I got your message today, with concerning this predictability that you see in how the U.S. Congress is made out of young leaders, that you can predict where they come from. I gathered from your speech, and I might be wrong, but this is what I understood, that there are pros and cons to this, right? Or you're smiling. Did I get it wrong? Or mostly? Okay, I wanted to. Okay, I'll keep going, because the idea is for young democracies like us, these Eastern countries that we have exited the communist regime. Is this a pattern that we should follow? Should we search for young leaders in such a manner? Or should we move in a different direction? I don't know if the word evolve in a different direction is correct. Rather move, I would say.
Vlad, let me answer your question in this way. I could speak on this topic for hours, and we had 20 minutes. Yeah. Even in this moment, I probably have about 90 seconds.
Okay.
So let me sort of follow up to your broad points. The evolution of the US political figure is pretty dramatic over the last 200 years, and even more so in the last 40 years. And in candor, once someone is elected to Congress, their primary job, right or wrong, is to raise money and push buttons. Great. Their primary job is to raise money and push buttons. I would not advocate for this necessarily for countries such as Romania. That said, when I talked about the notion of building relationships, the notion that you can identify here in Romania or in Poland or in Germany, young leaders that are going to be in positions of policymaking authority in the future, and connecting them with their European or American peers, and then fostering those relationships over time, I think is significant. That's probably not something that happens simply based on the individuals alone, but has a sort of a centralized coordinating activity in some point of the government. So that, again, let's assume you were elected to an office at some stage. If you have a relationship with someone that was in the legislature in California or Texas or Florida, and you've built that relationship over time, and then you go to Washington and they've also been elected to Congress, you walk into the office, you say, Mr. Congressman, so good to see you again, as opposed to the congressman looking to his staff and saying, this guy Vlad who's coming, do I really need to meet with him? Who is this? Can my staffer have to take this meeting? That's the difference.
Great. Thank you for trying to comprise your answer in the 90 seconds. That's a very good point, and I think everyone has now a better vision of what was the highlight of your presentation, and what manner our direction should be. Yes, right. Okay. So we will stop with the questions for the moment, but I'd like to remind our speakers that after all the keynote speakers, all the keynote speeches are delivered, we can still have other questions coming from physical online audience, and especially from you, because I know that we have always had good interactions between the speakers themselves, and I know Antonia is looking forward to probably debating on this topic a lot, and I'm sure she will have some questions and some interactions with you later on, right? I think I can count on that. Okay, so because I mentioned her name, let me now introduce our next speaker, Miss Antonia Colibășanu, joining us from Geopolitical Futures. She's online. She has been with us till the first hour, so we should be able to to display her her image, and I think she has a presentation as well. Let me follow up with a little bit of details about Ms. Antonia Liboșanu, who is a senior geopolitical analyst with a focus on strategic comparative intelligence analysis. She is Geopolitical Futures Chief Operating Officer. Prior to joining Geopolitical Futures in 2016 as a senior analyst, Dr. Liboșanu has spent more than 10 years with Stratfor in various positions, including as partner for Europe and vice president for international marketing. She is also a lecturer on international relations at the Romanian National University of Political Studies and Public Administration. She has also been a lecturer and will hopefully be a lecturer in Drezmara as well. And she's, of course, let's say, a strong supporter, helper, and partner in our conference. She has always joined us, and we like to thank her for that. And with that, allow me to say hi to Antonia and give her the floor for now. Hi, Antonia.
Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction, Vlad. It's a pleasure to see you and to see everyone there. And obviously, I'm sorry I could not join you today, but I will certainly join you to the sixth conference on the topic. So yes, I do have a presentation, but I would like to start by responding your challenge actually on saying a bit of a few words about what we are supposed to build upon when it comes to strategic relations. And this is also in regards to Poland, not only to the US. Obviously, a strategic dimension has to encompass the society. That means that stronger economic ties and stronger policy-making ties are very much a need to support that military ties that are already there and that are actually bringing us closer together to have this discussion actually. Because without defense and without the military ties between Romania and the US, between Romania and Poland, we couldn't really have this discussion about enhancing what we are having. So I had to say that because previously I was actually teaching strategy and geopolitics at Drezmara, and you asked for a response. So before I start sharing my screen, which I hope will be shared properly, had to add those two words, especially since I want to talk today about resilience. And this is a very fashionable word. It's kind of a word that we have discovered, in a sense, as the pandemic started. However, resilience is not related to the pandemic. It is a concept that we use very much in geopolitical analysis when we are looking at how stable a society is, or how stable is a sector within the society that is strategic. So I'm going to take, as usual, I'm going to take a theoretical approach to resilience and then focus a bit on what it means for our region and open up the questions at the very end from your end, actually, so that we can have a discussion instead of me, preaching to you my thoughts about what it means. Because honestly, while theory it is known, there is little really in practice and little shared with the society when it comes to the topic of resilience. And I'd like to hear more of your opinions as well. So the classic definition or the classic approach to resilience is basically covering two areas. First, we have the physical resilience, which we link to geography, we link to infrastructure, we link to everything that we can touch and see and understand from a vision perspective, because what we see, we perceive, and then we try to understand. But there is also psychological resilience, which is the unseen type of resilience that refers to trust levels within the society, that refers to the psychological part of support, if you want, for any kind of operations. And this is actually a concept that you will very much find in the military theories related to supporting operations and building trust within troops for going to fight, for going to war. Obviously, I'm going to focus first on the very physical part, because this is the part that we are seeing when we are talking about resilience. This is actually talking about the components of geopolitical analysis as we're having in our theoretical framework. So the society basically is built on three pillars. The society that we currently have is organized in nation states today. Obviously, geopolitically, we will always look at, we will always zoom in and look at the regional aspects, whether regions are formed of bigger nations, as it happens with the Eastern Europe or Central Europe or Southeastern Europe or the Balkans. But we will also look at regions within nation states, which is, Moldova for Romania or Transylvania and so on. Obviously, we will always look at how cohesive the society is when it comes to any kind of society, and whether the nation state supports the role that it should provide security to its population from the military point of view, the economic point of view, and obviously the political stability that it needs to ensure in order for the economic part and the military to come together and do their job in a sense. We are also looking at the functions of the nation state when we're trying to describe its resilience. And that has to do with wealth, which is a very interesting name for what we produce as human beings within the society. The nation state needs to help us produce wealth and defend the wealth that we are producing within the society, at the same time as it maintains and supports external relations with partners, but also supporting a stable environment for developing internal relations, which again resonates with the political stability part. So this is the strategic level of looking at a nation state and considering the nation state from a resilient point of view. Now, at the tactical level, we are looking at the psychological level, actually. And this is where education comes into play. You've heard me not once during this conference and other conferences talking about how education is very much important for supporting the strategic goals of a nation state. It is key when it comes to military education, and it is key, as Colonel Rosado said earlier, it is key when it comes to supporting military education today, when we have technology and innovation, not only supporting our society, but also challenging a bit the way it functions. So I will not get into details, but obviously we are talking about the environment for a person to develop, which needs to be stable in order for a person to support forming its behaviors and developing cognitions that it needs to in order to be resilient within the society and help to the development of the society. Now, if I were to say, what is it that makes the two parts of the resilience, when we are talking theoretically, where is it that they come together? That would be in innovation. What innovation means is change. Change is pretty much fearful for any kind of society, for any kind of environment, for any person whatsoever. The thought that we could have something better comes along with the thought that I may not be able to use it. Comes along with the thought that there might be something that doesn't work for me personally. There might be something that challenges my attachments, my own beliefs, which basically stops the project. And it's very, any innovation has to have some steps and has to have a project of adaptation in a sense. But if the resistance to change is big enough to stop the project of adaptation in the early phases, then obviously we're not going to talk about innovation at the end of the process, right? So what we are looking at when we are looking from the resilience perspective and looking into the framework of geopolitical analysis, we're basically looking at fears. Anything that means progress means instability. So it is equal in a sense with unstable environment. Anything that brings forth innovation and new technology is equal to a challenge of the way that the complex system of the society functions. That obviously makes us think about complex analysis and complex systems, which is, I'm not going to go into the very specifics of what that means, but currently I'm going to say that it means putting yourself in the other's shoe and basically try to see the world and the day-to-day life from the other's view. So if we're looking at states and the way that they see the map, we will always look for different perspectives, right? Russia's perspective is different than Germany's perspective and different than the UK's perspective. And these are the maps as they see the world, because it's a different kind of vision considering the world is round, right? We have the globe, but at the end of the day, when it comes to resilience and when it comes to innovation, the map is formed of human individuals. And that map, or this map that you're seeing here, is telling on how this physical map evolves. What do I mean by that? Sorry. I mean that we are forming linkages. We human beings, individuals, coming together are forming the map of the world. And we are defining perceptions at the political and strategic level. And this is even more important in the times of high uncertainty that we're living today. Today, we are having multiple crises, and this is no need for me to remind you of, right? We have the pandemic, but we also have a supply chain crisis. We also have challenge that is common to more than one societies when it comes to social resilience in the face of potential challenges created by technology and by the challenges that the supply chain crisis is bringing forth. So changing our jobs, changing the way we do things, changing the way that we are looking at human resources, changing the way that we are pretty much understanding politics and in a sense fearing change from the very individual sense of the world is shaping the map. And that is a key element that we are looking at right now, geopolitically. So right now, because we have more questions than answers, we're looking at this map, which is the internet map. The internet map, again, when it comes to 4G, and the satellite map. What countries are planning to do in order to get us to the next level when it comes to technology. So we are basically looking at what kind of fears all these plans and all these challenges produce within the societies. And how do these fears come together when it comes to networking? Is it only minds that get into a networking setting? Is it countries that are coming into a networking settings? Or is it the mindset that is changing? And then the mindsets are strategically changing the ways that countries come together and are networking with one another. We're at a pivotal moment, and not only because we are looking at the challenges in Asia. We've done so for, I think, almost a decade now. What we are doing now is looking at the details of our daily work, our daily life, and trying to assess what is important and what is not important. And that pressure, that individual pressure, transfers at the political level, a new kind of pressure that will likely produce challenges and transformation within the political environment that we are living, no matter where in the world we are living. So we're looking at China, and we are seeing issues of distress in China that may challenge Xi and the political stability in China. We are looking at elements that are changing the American society when it comes to the supply chain and the human resources availability in the US economy. We're looking at Latin America and elements that are very much disturbing in the socioeconomic field. For example, Brazil, where we're getting from worse to even worse, which is pretty bad. And we're looking at Africa, and we're discussing now at the level of the European Union what would mean for us to have to welcome a new migration wave coming from Africa this time. And not to mention that we are already trying to understand what is going on with Afghanistan, and if we have to brace for a migration wave, if we already have braced for a migration wave, if that wave is artificial or not, and what our relations with Russia really are when it comes to energy, right? We also face an energy crisis. So kind of a lot of problems and kind of a lot of pressures, not necessarily at the individual level. If you're not a geopolitical analyst, you would probably not think of all this every day. But if you're a politician, then you might. If you're a policymaker, then you certainly are going to think about this, especially if you're working in the foreign relations field. You have to. That's a must. So right now, I'm pretty much having I'm trying to stop share here. Okay. I'm pretty much having a lot of questions myself to begin with when I'm looking at the world and how resilient the world is. But to draw a conclusion, that is the key element, resilience. And it is psychological, first of all. It is related to the way the individuals understand it. It is referring to the way that we understand our freedoms, our way of life, and what the messages are that are being sent to our leaders. I would say that resilience is as a holistic concept when it comes to strategy is also one of the main triggers for innovation and for the manner in which innovation is transforming our society to the better or to the worse. Because innovation as a standalone does not exist without the human resource. And since I mentioned the human resource, we have a pandemic that will very much challenge the way that we are seeing the human resources. From the very perspective of demographics and from the next level of how we understand working with one another. I'm not referring to our jobs. I am referring, first of all, to those relationships that the previous speaker was talking about. How do we maintain those relationships? How we redefine our way of being within the society? That is probably the most important element of innovation that we are looking at these days. And with that, I'm going to end my short, I hope, presentation. I hope I didn't bore you. And looking forward to your questions and to having a discussion, even if short. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonia, for your okay. Thank you, Antonia, for your speech and your presentation. I sense a pattern here. So we are obviously dealing with uncertainties. Everyone acknowledges this. Seems that the key is the human resource, leaders, and how we manage innovation and technology for the future. That would be apparently the answer, and we have to adapt to this. We have a question from one of our participants. It's a little bit, let's say, on the borderline of the topic that you presented. It's related to, let's say, one of the hot topics of this year. The question comes from Colonel Usman Ali. So he mentions that, at least from what I understand from the question, the Afghan retake of Afghanistan during the Soviet Union war, the Taliban retake of Afghanistan this year. Is this an example of resilience, or is it a unique case? Again, this is the quote now from the question: negating the theories and concepts of the civilized world. This is the question that is asked on this topic.
It is a matter of resistance, which is different from the concept of resilience. Thank you for the question. If I understand it right, it is pretty much about Afghanistan resisting what we tried, the West tried to preach and implement in the Afghan society. And in this case, it is a matter of resistance to what we wanted to achieve there. It seems that there is a faction of the society that is resisting enough to reject those values. And we are beginning to look at whether that faction, the Taliban government and the supporters of the Taliban government are resilient, which is to say that we are looking at the way that the society is reacting to the government. So far, there is pretty much stability in Afghanistan in the sense of the government holding. But obviously, as we look from an analytical point of view, we understand that there might be challenges to the stability of the government from internal forces. So that is one key element to look at. And obviously, the other element to look at is how the external forces are going to react to what's going on in Afghanistan. And as we are worried in the West, we are also seeing China worried and Russia worried. It seems to be a matter where we could collaborate. It might be a matter where China takes the lead together with Russia or not. So it's all in the open. I'm not sure if I answered your question. I hope so, but that's all I have for now.
Okay, and thank you very much for the answer. And let's say as a follow-up to this, if we were to look at the concepts of hard power and soft power, which do you think is more suited or adaptable for resilience as we see it now in all of these contexts that you have presented?
Both.
Both. Okay.
You cannot have one without another. So we are getting into a world. Let me answer in another way. When the Cold War ended, we thought that globalization is going to bring peace, right? We kind of entered perceptually in a world where soft power seemed to increase its role and seemed to have become more important than hard power. That was obviously not necessarily what was going on, but perceptually, that was what happened. It was an area where the alliances were coming together, where countries seemed to talk to one another more often and so on. Right now, and starting with the 2008 crisis, and now even more so with the pandemic, we're getting to a world where we're seeing a process of deglobalization, which means that the hard power is coming back to be at least as important as the soft power. Obviously, both are increasingly complex. So if we're talking about technological progress in hard power, we are also talking about technological progress at the cognitive level when it comes to soft power. So we are talking about geoeconomics, for instance, which is coming forth in defining how we interact with one another, countries interact to one another, and what kind of tactics we have to project power. We are talking about hybrid warfare in the cyberspace, which is a very complex issue to talk about. There are specialists that only focus on that. But that is a tactic of soft power and hard power combined, for instance. So they are increasingly complex, and hard power is definitely back to us.
Great, thank you for the answer. Now, of course, we'd like to ask our keynote speakers if they want to address any questions to Antonia. I can give you the mic.
Antonia, lovely presentation. Josh Bergen here. Your discussion on resilience, and as you're looking to the future, if there were sort of 2 or 3 key concepts that you would advise, say an audience with Joe Biden, an audience with key leaders in Europe, what would they be?
That's an interesting question. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have an answer to that one. They would be focused on the society, focus on making sure that there are no increases in differences between classes. The more there is a difference between classes, the more you have a risk at home. Resilience always starts home. Before you go with any ally to fight the enemy, you have to be aware. You at home have to be aware who the enemy is. And be careful not to have an enemy within your own population. That is to say, if there are classes of people that are coming together in conflict within the nation state, then you have a resilience problem. So that is key for us today, because in the future, we are also looking at the society evolving globally with areas of no government, areas where central government cannot impose its will, which is increasingly becoming a matter of urban areas in Europe, both urban and non-urban areas in the US. So we are having this in the developed world. We're no longer talking about Fergana Valley to have that kind of society. And the more we have the upper class and the lower class apart and no middle class, the worse we are.
The quick follow-up, would the same advice apply to European leadership as well, or would you have slightly different perspective there?
Yes, I would pretty much say the very same thing for the European leaders. Maybe with some nuances when it comes to rural versus urban, when it comes to holding together urban areas and migration management issues. So pretty much the same with some flavors for each country, but the same applies here. It's throughout the developed world that I'm seeing this. And that we are discussing. It's not only I that I'm looking at the map. Obviously, at geopolitical futures, we're discussing this often. And with the supply chain crisis, for instance, we've noticed that the human resources issue is going to become a class issue, and that is dangerous for government stability, for governance. Not necessarily governance, and its role in managing the world.
Good morning, Antonia. Andrzej Soboń speaking. Nice to see you. Hello.
Nice to hear you. Okay. Welcome to Brasov.
Yeah, so I am very happy also. Antonia, I am first of all congratulate your presentation as always. It's perfect, and also I am very happy that your map on your wall is in direction south and north, not in the other, as you presented for us. I would like to ask you, maybe a bit far from your resilience presentation, but also my question is about the European Union as the resilience on the crisis or migration problems create now on the eastern border of European Union. How, in your opinion, in your research, you will assess the situation?
Yeah, that is a sort of a topic that I'm looking at for the last 2 months. And there are two main ideas here. First, that the migration wave from the east is pretty much natural, that it is something that we should have expected from Afghanistan, something that we were preparing for since July in the European Union, actually. But, and this is the other vision, but there is something that we have not expected. And we are seeing information with regards to Russia using the current migration wave to challenge our security in the East, to challenge the relations between Poland and Belarus, for instance. And that is not exactly on the pattern of a normal migration wave. So this is one topic that I'm seeing as an important topic for the winter. This will likely test the way that the European Union comes together with a resolution of what measures are to be implemented on the eastern borderline, and how we can work together within the European Union with regards to this situation, which is a very sensible and a very unique situation, I would say, but also a strategic one. So I don't have a definite answer. However, it is more complicated and more complex than what we are looking at a migration wave usually. How it will evolve, I hope that it will not challenge the current relations within the European Union, and certainly I hope that this will not challenge the way that we have our relations with Russia.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And with this, I think we can move to our next keynote speaker. And I would like to remind everyone that after, at the end of this first plenary session, we'll again see if there are any other questions or chances to debate or discuss our topic of the day. So Andrei Sobon, whose question you have just heard, Colonel Andrei Sobon will be our next keynote speaker. He's a colonel of the Polish Armed Forces, professor at the War Studies University in Warsaw, dean of the National Security Faculty inside the War Studies University in Warsaw, with the title of associate professor. In this role, Andrei conducts broad studies and analysis on the character of pro-defensiveness. He's an author of several dozen publications in the field of pro-defense preparations, immigration, education, and international cooperation. Andrei also has led the Consortium of Uniformed University in Poland, which was founded in 2014 on the topic of mobility and internationalization of higher education institutions. His topic of today will be on refugees in multi-domain asymmetric conflict. And besides all of this, Andrei has been one of the strongest and most faithful and loyal partners to our conference in helping us develop it. And we'd like to thank him for once again joining us and bringing some colleagues together to make this conference even better. Thank you, Andrei, and you have the floor.
Ask for presenter. Okay, before I will start, I would like to thank you very much, Professor Dimitrashev Vlad, for, as always, perfect invitation and introduction. Of course, I am very happy to hear the presentation of Joshua about leadership on the level of on the highest level. So I think that a lot of politicians should deeply analyze your speech, and I am not only speaking about the Polish, of course. I think this good moment. I don't see director of the Smara Colonel Grosaru, but Professor Dumitrache. Okay, okay. So I understand. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, today is this day that I had the pleasure on behalf of me and academic community of National Security Faculty congratulate the SMARA for organizing this conference. It's true that we cooperate during the 5 years and we appreciate this value. So I think that it's not working, the presenter. Okay. Okay, so from many years we cooperate with the SMARA, and today being the 5th time, it is a good moment to once again congratulate and thanks Colonel Grosaru for our activity. And I hope that we both, the SMARA and National Security Faculty of World Studies University in Warsaw, we can go together in our common scientific direction. Anyway, I see also enthusiasm of my colleagues, professors from my faculty who joined with me in this very hard time and moment. Most of them is fighting with, let's say, COVID threats and conduct the didactic process face-to-face in didactic room in Warsaw. So this is maybe the reason that we cannot be here in a bigger group, but once again, Professor Grosaru, thank you very much for our activity. So I still have in my head words of Director of World Human Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, who said that now more than ever, we need a security. So what I would like to present to you today is aspect of refugees as the tool in Belarusian regime. So my topic showing on this slide is very important to better understanding crisis on the eastern border of European Union as also eastern border of NATO. So once again, I'm very happy that the map which show Professor Kolibasanu, Antonia, is still in direction as the south and at the north. So again, thank you very much that I can be in our group physically, not as the online as it was the last time. So I will focus on 4 elements. So I am looking on Professor Dumitrache because still is showing me that time is very limited. So before I will start, some elements, not the definition, what is the multi-domain or asymmetric threats. The concept of multi-domain operation describes action across domain of defeat the adversary system using competition below armed conflict, but neither seeks to escalate to open conflict. In this case, Russia continued to undermining established international norm to achieve their strategic objective in various parts of the world. From the other side, asymmetric warfare is understood as conflict involving parties who differ either in terms of their legal status, power, capabilities, or strategies. So when all these features are present, it is very easy to recognize an asymmetric conflict. But is it enough for 2 or just one of these attributes to be included into this classification? Or is one dimension more essential than others? There is a changing concept of asymmetry by looking at the parts of various dimensions like refugees. There is a need to analyze the impact of various tools used by actors in order to state response to these threats. But it is the involvement of migrants, not refugees, in this element. In Poland experience, yes. Since August this year, it has become an example of groundless attack by, and is the question, only the Republic Belarus? Russia presents its military forces in way aligned with the mission of deterring and defeating conventional attack. Russia has also developed a number of bastions around the periphery. Some of them, of course, is one called Kaliningrad region, but the Kaliningrad substantial military forces are under the command of Russia Baltic Fleet headquarters. They include some the most developed system as the air missile or coastal castle missile systems. This region is very important because develop the Russian capabilities to the west of Russia. Then another is Republic of Belarus. Its neighborhood is referred to the post-Soviet republic. The Russian desire to retain a measure of control and influence in post-Soviet Belarus. It is determined by common roadmaps which we observed during the last months. Ladies and gentlemen, the migration crisis was potentially triggered by a number of factors related to Belarusian international policy. Poland and Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, are the victim of the revenge on the European Union announced by Lukashenko for the sanction introduced as the consequence of repression of the Belarusian regime against citizens and the falsification of elections. The whole action began shortly after forcing to land at the airport in Minsk, Ryan aircraft on May 23rd this year. The flight was used, we know, by the opposition blogger Roman Protasiewicz, but this action is continuation of well-known plan prepared by Belarus. Because this plan was bringing to action already 10 years ago. And the author of this plan is the current head of the Belarusian KGB Committee for State Security, Ivan Tertel, and also his brother, Yuri Tertel, the then commander of the elite unit of the border guard, OSAM. At that time, the transfer to migrants across the European Union borders was to force the European Union to provide Belarus with financial aid. And the plan was successful because Minsk received lots of millions of euros from European Union. Today, illegal migration of Iraqis to Lithuania, to Poland, is supported by state services and enterprises, which Alexander Lukashenko personally encouraged. Migrants themselves don't want to cross the Polish border to stay in Poland, but to get farther to the countries of Western Europe. Therefore, they don't want to apply for asylum in Poland. In this sense, the protection of European Union border is very important. In opinion of
spokesman of Minister Coordinator of Polish Secret Service, the migration crisis is being implemented with great support from the Russian Federation and is visible on different fields like energy pressure, blackmail of European Union with gas prices, and also pressure on the launch Nord Stream 2. Hence, it can be seen that Russia is using Belarus as the tool. Distinguished audience, the use of inspired crisis situation related to migration pressure or illegal migration can be considered as one of elements of multi-domain asymmetric conflict. So I would like to show you in very fast way, introduce this 5 scenario. The scenario number 1, the inspirer of migration pressure use realized criminals or people who pose to a threat to security, such as terrorists, who are transferred under pressure of migration. So therefore, there is a misconception that all illegal migrants are a direct threat to citizens. The scenario number 2, the inspirer of migration pressure use his own secret agency or special services in order to destabilize, emerge, hustle, and create a fake news in media about state failure. The state reaction may be to confirm that it is well prepared to defend the borders and that the action taken on the border are effective. Scenario number 3, the inspirer of migration pressure creates a picture of the attacked country or attacked countries or even European Union as the unable to control borders. This is particularly important when we are talking about the external borders of not one, but many countries. Scenario number 4, the inspirer of migration pressure provokes some riots through his own secret agency services to involve local movement or NGOs. There will be some protest of riots, preferably on the part country, or the best one will be on the whole country. Focusing on the problem of migration allows to reduce interest in other problems. And the last but not least, scenario number 5, the inspirer of migration pressure builds the reality of media facts and use them to attack the country. In this way, media create an image of migration crisis. On the basis of this scenario, can be organize some counteract. The first one is interoperability between the border guards, the police, armed forces in terms of dislocation forces on this area. The next one is creating some temporary border areas or some barriers and increasing them in the number of systems for observation and monitoring. The next one is building or ability to build temporary facilities for the refugees, for checking them or verify these people. And last but not least, also ability to effectively respond in information to propaganda, but not as the reaction to accusation or lies, but as the control over the narrative in the international space, national, international, political, etc. In this case of inspired migration pressure, it is gaining the ability to conduct active strategic communication in multiple language. I pointed out that Russia is using Belarus as tool. A large number of migrants arriving at Polish-Belarusian border from Russia, especially from Moscow, because this is one of the air transport hubs. The migration route was launched during the Russian-Belarusian Zapad exercises. So Belarus wouldn't have allowed itself to implement this practice on such a scale during outgoing military exercises without Russian consent. Iraqis were able to get to Belarus thanks to increasing the number of flights between Iraqi cities and Minsk. I am thinking about Baghdad, Irbal, Basra, and others. Please remember that at the beginning of 2021, it was only one flight per week between Baghdad and Minsk. Now, the number of connection started to grow rapidly. Of course, there are flights from Turkey, Egypt, Kazakhstan, and other countries. But one element is common. All people coming to Belarus are serviced by the state-owned company Centr Kurort, in fact linked to Lukashenko family business empire. Of course, after landing, these people was grouped in 5, 10 persons at the airport or the center of Minsk. Dear colleagues, recruitment of candidates for trip to Belarus was and still is based on wide-range disinformation. Campaign which is convincing that it's very easy to cross the border with Lithuania, with Poland, with Latvia, and next one continue the trip through Poland to Germany and other European Union countries. But the smuggling mafia cooperating with Belarusian services guarantees that this route is safe. Messages are confirmed also by some videos prepared by migrants who reach their destination without any problem. The overwhelming majority were and are citizens of Iraq, Congo, Cameroon, but they weren't refugees in understanding of law, but illegal migrants because this person aren't let's say don't have any danger in own countries. The attack on the Poland began in the first day of August. As I said, not at this moment when the aircraft was forced for landing. But for comparison, in 2019, the border guard detained near 200 people. In 2020, it was also near 200 people. But only in first half of 2020, the number was crossing. And as you see, there are number prepared by my research day per day during the last 100 days. At the moment, the number are about 700 every day when the border guard detain or arrest for illegal trying to cross the border. Also, another aspect that the Polish, Lithuania, and the Frontex recordings are visible how Belarusian services are escorting columns of migrants going to the border. Also, they were driven by buses of Belarusian army. But let's analyze the last 10 days, 100 days on the international level. 1st of July, the Atlantic Council estimates that the Lukashenko is using illegal immigrants from the Middle East as the weapon against the European Union. Another maybe, which is important for this moment, the 6th of July, the talks was organized by European Council with Lithuanian president. Then another, also from the other sources, last day of August, the police in Germany are recording an increase the number of illegal immigrants arriving via Belarus to the German camps. In September, Poland announced the state of emergency on the Polish-Belarusian border. Another fact, in Riga, the defense ministers of Poland and Baltic states organized talks. It was 14th of September. And also this, another element, it's lot which show that the Belarusian regime used the migrants as the weapon against the European Union and, of course, directly Poland and Baltic countries. Ladies and gentlemen, by October 15, the border guard record near 20,000 people, 20,000 migrant attempts to illegally crossing the Polish-Belarusian border. You can only imagine that all of the migrant pay about 50,000 US dollar. So only the numbers showing that the dollars are treated as the influence for Alexander Lukashenko regime. On the basis of the collected data, several institutions can be identified. The first one, airport in Minsk. The second, collapsing Belarusian Bielavia airline. Also some presidential administration supervising by St. Kurol travel agency. We can add also some power structure like OSAM or KGB institution, etc., etc. Another fact is also some kinds of psychological and propaganda aspect of Belarusian attack on or against Poland. Generally, it is called as the Operation Lock, because the tragedy of people is joined with maybe not serious behavior of government of the countries like Poland or another. What we are observing from the side of Belarusian regime, that the name of Belarus in this propaganda is called as the safe country and open for refugees. In this way, the regime tried to discredit the border services and the same, of course, the authorities of every country by saying that these services are unable to cope with border control, and another much more worse, that the services are inhuman towards the refugees. Of course, the false message is directed to Belarusian society, Polish society, and international society, but the goals in every case are different and in another way prepare. So initially, the Polish society reacted naturally, but after the introduction, the state of emergency on the eastern border, the situation was and is still worst. But what I can say as summary of this speech. So, of course, Lukashenko regime tried to quarrel Poland with European Union, what finally didn't happen because European Union condemned the action on the Belarusian border as functioning properly. So another fact, Lukashenko tried to intensify the migration wave from Belarus through Poland to Germany, maybe to trying to destabilize the situation in Germany before the election. This also didn't happen. But in my opinion, after the research, Lukashenko probably hoped that just as Germany gave way to Turkey's demands in 2015, it would also do to Belarus. However, this didn't happen. I understand that time is over. So I could say also about some maybe not scenarios, but rules can happen in near future. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and I hope that you survive this speech. And as Professor Evgenia, okay, Antonia said, you have possibility to practically understand what does mean the topic of the previous speech. I am ready for some questions.
A microphone delivered. So first of all, I would like to welcome Mr. Ioan Mircea Pașcu and thank him for joining us here. He had a decisive role in us joining NATO, and we've been discussing that here today. Thank you, sir, for being here, and we are waiting for your presentation tomorrow in our third plenary session. Thank you, Andre, for your very interesting presentation about something very fresh and hot topic, very interesting approach you had today, and just shows that what we've been discussing here, the fact that basically a reality, a problem that happened in the political world, the general elections from Belarus, the flawed elections from Belarus, turned, as we can see, in a security issue concerning the Eastern flag. We have here members and participants from Poland, from Lithuania. We have online from Republic of Moldova. So important issues of concern for all of these countries that you have presented to us. Of course, if there are any questions on this matter, we would like to see them now. And I don't see any, or are there any online? Let me check. We have an online question. So from Amin, we have he states that he has experience as a gendarmerie officer and border guard, and this sort of refugees and migrants from countries destabilized by civil war is a very important challenge, obviously. And can you give more details on this particular subject? Expand a little bit on this.
Okay, so thank you very much for this element, because due to the lack of time, I couldn't also develop this idea. So, of course, very well known is the crisis in Usnarz Górny. This is a very small village on the western border of Poland, where as we see in the propaganda and the Polish media also to underline, 30 persons suffer with in the zone between Polish and Belarusian border. But the fact is that according to the Polish border guard, that the people are still different. So it doesn't mean that we see still the same 30 women plus children and several men. Because according to the Stanisław Żaryn, the Polish spokesman of the Polish Ministry Coordinator of Special Service, the people are still different. Most of them, of the people, are cooperate with Belarusian regime from very beginning, and also most of them was living in Russian Federation. So as we see, this element is very hard to understand, maybe from the human point of view. But if we're thinking about the borders, about the guard of border, especially in this element like European Union, the services like border guard supported by another institution must work according to the law, and law show that this is the border and a crossing is possible in the places which are pointed on the map. If the places are pointed on the map, every migrants have possibility to try or to put the application for asylum in Poland. But as you observe, probably no one from this group don't think about asylum in Poland. They think about Germany, about the other Western countries of the European Union. So it is completely impossible to go by foot from Afghanistan to via Belarus, when we have also Ukraine, another, to the Polish border. Someone must support and help them. And we know that St. Kurort support these people. The people buy the flight tickets, go to the Minsk. From the Minsk in group was pick up to the Polish border. And especially the Usnasz Górny, I said the name of the village, is the special place because near this village is special prepared place for landing the helicopters who can pick up another group on also support. So, Professor,
Yeah.
I finished my speech.
I think it's a good one. Thank you for the question. And we have another question.
I have one question and one little curiosity. I will begin with my question. If considering the strategic communication, you mentioned 5 scenarios, and I'm wondering if are there 5 scenario-based different strategies, or the strategic communication is considering wider phenomenon in which 1, 2, or all the 5 scenarios could cascade or develop simultaneously? This is my first question. And the curiosity is if there are signs that the smugglers network who smuggle illegal migrants into Poland are state-sponsored, or at least have the full support of the neighboring state agencies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Let's say questions, because it is very hard to answer in very short time. As also Joshua said, that we have 90 seconds for answer. The scenario was prepared by me at the beginning of August. How the situation we develop. So it's mean that today minimum 4 of them is. Or maybe not organized, but it is in action. So you're asking me about the strategic communication, no, about the strategic communication of Poland. So I'm officer wearing uniform, so I cannot say you in this way which allow me the science. But I can only say that some institutions responsible for strategic communication unfortunately didn't care about the voice or about the Polish explanation of this situation of international level. Thank you.
Okay.
Colonel Bassan, this is the most comprehensive presentation I've seen on this migration issue that's been going for a few years now of Russia and its subsidiary partner, Belarus, using migration almost with a volume control to turn it up and turn it down at will, to create tension, to create problems. You've described the mechanics of the people and their flow. What are you seeing or hearing around perhaps some of the follow-on effects? Are some of these participants coming in considered to be an intelligence or perhaps an other form of security risk down the road as well, beyond just the impacts of social services, transportation, etc.?
So thank you very much, Joshua, for this question also. The question is very sensitive because for every transport, every group, there are some human tragedy. You will remember that people pay money or spend money for flight tickets. They receive some information that the road is very safety. But here, they also are in fact that the border are guards by people. What will be in the near future, in near months, I think that will be resolved by environment, by nature, because we expect the winter. So probably the problem with migration will be on the side of St. Kurort, which organized the trip, let's say trip to Poland, because as I observe from military point of view and point of view of Polish border guard, as also the Lithuanian, that no one of these countries will give up and will open the border. We can maybe observe that after that Lukashenko regime will try to direct the flow to Ukraine or through Ukraine, and also trying to force the Polish border, but not from the side of Belarus, but from the side Ukraine. But it is another situation, another scenario that probably, if not here in Poland, is possible because it stop. If Lithuania stop also and close the border, so maybe another southern parts of Belarus and the border with Ukraine. We will see.
Okay, thank you. Antonia, if there's anything you'd like to ask on this topic.
I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for this presentation, Andrei. I would very much like to.
If we could just one moment, because we cannot hear you very well.
Okay.
Just 1 second, please. Could you try now?
I can definitely try. Okay.
We can still not hear you. I don't know why. Now we can.
Now you can. Okay. I'm also hearing myself, which is kind of creepy. Without much echoing, I hope. I was saying that I'm very grateful for your presentation, Professor Andrei. It's really a really clear image of what and comprehensive image of what's going on. I haven't seen one like this, especially I haven't seen that in the media. So thank you very much for this. I would like to ask you, if possible, to share it maybe later, or maybe Vlad, you can share it with me. But bottom line, what do you think Poland will have to do if the European Union is not coming together with the protection measures to the borderline? Like what are the options that you're looking at from Poland and at this matter? Because it's pretty clear where we are after seeing your presentation.
Antonia, thank you very much for your question. I remember your presentation last year or 2 years ago when you show us a possible scenario for the flow, for the direction of the migrants. I have still in my head as you show. So in this way, I can compare that your prediction prepared 2 years ago, I maybe not used by Lukashenko regime, but are facts. What and how the Polish, let's say, government authorities will manage this crisis on the level European Union, it is very hard for me at the moment to answer. I know only about only one, that the Polish border guards and the Lithuanian border guard will not open the border. And having support from European Union, from Commission of European Union in this matter, we can say that our job is organized on high level. Evgenia.
Antonia.
Understood. Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that the map that I use came kind of true. So apologies for that. I had not meant to. But the truth is, you know, maps are standalone stuff. It is humans that are deciding where to go. And in this way, you might be right. Russia and Belarus may have made good use of that map.
One fact is, if you observe the Gerasimov war, maybe not standard, but maps, we see the hybrid level for hybrid war. So it shows directly that it's only one step to conventional threats, conventional war, what I hope will never happen. But this scenario must be also taken by consideration.
Let's hope will not happen. It will not happen. So yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. Very, very good one. Thanks much.
Thank you, Antonia, for joining us. I understand that you have to be on time for another presentation. So thank you for joining us for this first plenary session. If there are any other questions, yes, sir. We have a mic right behind you.
Well, I also want to.
Just one moment to turn it up. Yeah.
Okay. I also want to thank you for your presentation, and to my mind, I think, you know, that Poland should try to put this new development, annoying the development and your borders, in the true perspective. In other words, you know, you should not give too much importance to something which seems to be limited by its own nature. Because, for instance, if they cannot go through your border to reach Germany or whatever, where they want to go, they will have to be housed there in Belarus. And therefore, you know, this is not so convenient for the regime to have to take care of that. So to my mind, I think, you know, that this is just an annoyance, a problem which has been created. So you should divert some resources, energy, attention to this problem, together with Lithuania and the Baltics. But essentially, it's an annoyance which has been created. And in a way, allowing Lukashenko to appear that he's paying back what the European Union has done to him. The propaganda war, which has might be started by Belarus, Belarusia, is not successful. I mean, it doesn't have chances for success because it's not credible. The regime is not credible. How can you say, you know, that you mistreat those people when they mistreat their own citizens? So you see where it might be, shall we say, important if they manage to transfer the propaganda to some Western representatives who would try to use this to amplify the criticism against Poland or something. But at the same time, this is a very, I would say, sensitive topic in the West. And the West and the European Union have realized how sensitive it is, and they don't want to play little games with this topic. And so my, shall we say, reaction would be that you should not get too much involved into this. Preserve a bird's eye, devote whatever is necessary to control the situation locally, but be ready for something else and keep your readiness for something else. Where it might become really important and dangerous, it would be if these Afghan refugees would come in mass there. But that cannot be done without logistical support, important logistical support, and everybody would know who is providing that logistical support. So therefore, you see, that didn't happen yet. So I think, you know, that a correct view on the proportion, real proportions of these developments is necessary under the circumstances. Thank you very much.
So, sir, thank you very much for your words, because they are very close to our activities, because the same European Union, the same goals. I would also add one element, which is element of Belarusian propaganda, especially the regime. The regime tried to say for people, so citizens from Belarus, that European Union isn't so perfect like maybe the people try to understand. That in European Union, the democracy isn't so clear because the police beat the people, the border guard works under the inhuman standards, etc., etc. This is the propaganda which is directed to Belarusian people. No one from European Union didn't understand what Lukashenko wants to direct in the messages what will happen or what happened on the region of the crisis, migrants crisis, because the democracy is the most important element in every country. So the people have law for some activity. How it's happened in different countries, it is only element of decision of government on country's level, states level. Thank you very much for your words.
If I may, I agree with you because I concentrated myself also on the relationship or what can be done towards your country, towards Poland, you know, and I neglected, shall we say, the internal impact in Belarus of trying to compromise this way the European Union. But at the same time, there will be a problem. For instance, they cannot get in, they have to settle there. And then, you know, practically they will be able to say to their own population, look, what the European Union has created for us, and you have to pay for it, and so on and so forth. And I agree, I haven't thought of that, but I agree that you are right. It might be very well be done in order to compromise the European Union in the eyes of the Belarusian citizens. That might be something. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, thank you very much for all of this exchange of ideas and the intake that was presented here. With this, we conclude our first plenary session. We will have a 10 minutes break. Coffee awaits you. And after that, we'll have a short change of schedule, meaning that what we had in plan in terms of that multimedia presentation of the Hacking for Defense educational program. We'll move it in the afternoon in our second plenary session, because Mr. James Blank for RAM Corporation unfortunately cannot join us due to COVID reasons. So we'll move that multimedia presentation over there. It's a short multimedia presentation anyway. And I would like to also ask all our online colleagues to please not leave this presentation. Check for the chat button. On the chat button, I'll be sending the link for the section paper panel online starting with 1:30, but I'll be sending the link in the following 5 to 10 minutes. So for those participants over there, please join the chat now to receive the link. Ms. Ebru Caimaz, Mr. Cosmin Darie, Mr. Petre Mihalcea, Mr. Mihai Păduraru, Ms. Diana Ramf, and Mr. Savuț, please await the link. Of course, for all of you other participants that are now online, you can also use that link and join us for that section paper to see what will be presented over there. And also, please remember that starting with 3 o'clock, besides that multimedia presentation that I told you about, we still have 2 keynote speakers for our second plenary session, a very interesting one. David Rader, who's a Deputy Director for the Office of the Secretary of Defense, United States, and Silviu Nate, who's Associate Professor from the Director of Global Studies Center, to complete the discussion we just had, let's say, on the eastern flank, on the upper part of the eastern flank. We'll have a speech on Russia's profile and its strategic game in the Black Sea. So we're going to go a little bit to the southern part of the eastern flank. That being said, we'll have our break, and then our guests are invited to lunch upstairs, and we'll be back, as I said, with our section panel sessions. For those that are physical, you have on the agenda where to go. For the online, once again, please await for our link. Use the chat on this current Zoom presentation. Thank you all for attending and for joining us today. We'll be back here in a short while.
Romania, a country of legends, a land of fairy tales that has not yet presented all of its stories. The Danube, the Carpathian Mountains, the Black Sea, and the lovely hills are all joined together in a fascinating story. And the people with the cultural sites, the history, art, and traditions all form a perfect harmony in a painting that awakens the traveler's emotions. You can travel to find your true self. You can travel to discover new cultures, new people, new with all your heart. In that place where the water is clearer, the sky is bluer, and the sun is shinier than the last time. Travel with me. Discover your land. Discover a fairy tale Romania. The land where the mountains with their high peaks, the green hills with their fruitful vineyards, the plains with their golden fields, all merge together in a perfect harmony. The country where you can see running free the last wild horses in Europe. the country of mountain shepherds and fishing in the Danube Delta. There is something that only our beautiful Romania has, something that gives it charm and richness, the folklore and the traditions, so well preserved by people that hold dear their land and their past. The uniqueness of the Romanian national costumes, of the folk dance styles, of the traditional music, and the customs that envelop all the big holidays of the year. All these form a culture like no other in the world, and they allure both Romanians and foreigners. Travel with me. You will discover by watching us authentic traditional recipes from the 9 historical regions of Romania. Travel with us in our Romania, your Romania, as we see it and as we are sure you see it too. Here are some touristic regions from Romania that are worth visiting. Discover a fairy tale Romania, a country of legends. Travel with me.